Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the CURT EZr Underbed Gooseneck Kit with double lock that's rated at 30,000 pounds on a 2024 GMC Sierra 2500. Now, a lot of newer trucks that we're seeing that are 3/4 ton have the factory prepped package, so they have the puck system where you can drop in fifth wheels or already have a gooseneck. But if you didn't get one from the factory, not to worry, there's still plenty of options available, and this is one of those kits. This is going to allow you to have gooseneck hookups along with your safety chain loops, and overall this is one of the nicer looking ones as a finished product. You have a nice trim ring here. And you can see that your safety chain loops are nice spring loaded, so you can hook up, drop those in place, and they're not going to take away from any of the bed space. What's really nice too is the ball, when not in use, you can actually drop this down, upside down. It's going to store it in place for you, and that way whenever you're ready to tow, you can simply pull this out by the handle, flip it over, drop it in place, and then you can lock it from the side and you're ready to go. Another nice added feature that CURT gives you is going to be a cap. And that way when you have it stored in place, you can put this right over top, and that's going to keep any buildup from getting in there whenever you're not using the ball. So, you know, just something simple, but it does add a lot as far as total package for this. And having the handle as well as this trim ring makes it look really nice. This is one of the better looking ones out there once it's installed. It also comes with the gooseneck ball, and this one's rated at 30,000 pounds. It's going to be a 2 5/16. You'll see that this is, actually set up for this system. The way that these slots work make it really nice. So as you can tell, right now it's not dropping in place. As soon as I get those slots aligned, that'll drop in. Gives you a nice sense of feeling that you have it in place. And then to lock this in place, you'll have your latch on the outside of the truck. You can pick which side you want that latch. We put ours on our driver's side. You'll just release that, get the pins to lock in place, and then this will be locked in. The double pin is going to be for added security, so you have 2 pins going through, where some of the other traditional gooseneck kits is just 1. But this, being that it lines up in place, makes it nice and easy for both of those to slide in place, and having 2 pins just really feeds into the heavy duty capacities. The ball is going to be rated at 30,000 pounds, as so is this whole kit. Pretty heavy duty for a 2500 like this. It's going to be a great match. You'll be able to tow, some pretty heavy duty trailers. And as far as the tongue weight or the vertical load that's put on here, it's going to be 7,500 pounds, which is also pretty heavy duty. The entire kit is either powder coat finish, chrome, or zinc coated. So, as this lives on the back of your truck, even if you don't have a tonneau cover to protect it, it is going to hold up to the elements, with no issues. I do like the fact that this is able to be stored in that vertical. That way it's ready to go when you are, and then that cap just adds to that protection. Same thing with the spring-loaded clips here. I did have to cut a little bit out of our bed mat to gain access, but these are really nice because when they drop in, they sit in the bottom corrugation. So really, once this is installed, as you see it right now, we are not losing any space in our bed. So when you're ready to tow, you'll have the ball ready. When you're ready to hook up your safety chains, they're spring-loaded. You can pull those up, but whenever you're just using your truck as a truck, it's going to be nice and flat here, so you can still load, lumber, drywall, anything that you need to. This isn't the easiest underbed gooseneck kit I've done. If you're looking for ease of installation, I highly suggest the B&W, but finished product wise, this one looks really good. At the end of the day, you're going to kind of get the same results. So if you are installing this, definitely follow along with the video. The instructions leave a lot to be desired. There are going to be a few times that you might be a little confused. Just follow along with the video and we'll make sure you get it installed. But with that being said, there's really no real drilling required except for what you see here just to gain access. And that's where CURT really helps you out here. A lot of your other underbed gooseneck kits, the first step is measuring and then drilling your hole with the hole saw and hoping that it's nice and lined up. Whereas this one, you actually have a plate that you put in place, and that creates a template for you to drill straight up. So as far as getting this lined up in place where you want it, it's probably one of the better kits out there. Not to say that the other ones aren't pretty easy to do, but it's easy to mess up. Follow along. I'll make sure that you get this installed on your truck step by step. And definitely have the instructions handy. You're going to need that for some of the torque settings. And if you find that this is maybe something beyond your scope, maybe you don't have the place to do it, the tools to do it, or even the want to do it, you can use our dealer locator. And that way you can find someone close to you to get this installed. But for you DIYers, stick around. We'll walk through the install and make sure you get yours installed. To begin our installation, we're going to want to lower down our spare tire. That's just really going to give us a lot more real estate to work while we're underneath the vehicle. So we'll go ahead, we'll get this taken down and moved off to the side. Now to also give us a little bit of room to work, we're going to be removing our heat shield. And this is going to be two 13mm bolts that attach to the frame rail. So you're going to probably want a long extension here. And we'll set this aside. Now with previous underbed kits on the Chevys, I've found that if you remove this heat shield as well, it makes it a lot easier. A lot of times we'll be running stuff through here and it really doesn't get in the way of getting the parts in, but when you go to tighten it down, it's kind of a pain to be able to access all that. So to get this removed, you're going to want a Shortwell 13 and we'll get the bolts taken out. And then there's going to be two on the frame rail here and then one on the further cross member. So go ahead and get those taken out. To get to the two that are mounted up on the frame rail, it can be pretty tight. You might be able to get a ratcheting 13mm wrench on there. But something that we're going to want to do regardless is loosen up the fender liners. Now we don't need to completely take them out. And in fact, a lot of times when you take them out, they're not very fun to put back in. So I'm just going to remove the 3 screws here and then we'll be able to peel that back and give us access to that hardware. And that's also going to make sense when we start to run our hardware in, as it does need to pass through the frame rail. So just a T15 Torx bit. We'll just get these 3 removed for now. If you want to, you can take off a few more to give you a little more access, but for now this should get us started. Go ahead and do this on both sides of the vehicle. Because once we pass those rails in, you'll see exactly why. Now it may kind of just be adhered to the frame a little bit once you get the hardware off, just from that undercoating. It kind of creates a nice adhesion. Now something else in the instruction manual that they recommend is going to be lowering down the exhaust. And a lot of times when you do, it gives you a little bit more wiggle room, but a lot of these heavy duty or 3/4 ton exhausts, they don't move that much even once you get the isolator taken down. So I'm going to hang tight on that. If we do need a little bit more room later on, we can always take those isolators down and get a little bit to be able to pull that down. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We're going to want to prep our rails, and these are powder coated, and unfortunately that means that it's going to be where the threads are for our bolts. And to make this a lot easier, we're going to want to clear these out before we get them up on the truck. So I went through and put my hardware in place. That way I can zip it through, clear out that powder coating. Now you're going to find that the inside 4 of them on each rail are going to be the smaller diameter bolts, and then you're going to have your larger ones on the outside edges. And something I'll point out while we have them here is you'll see that this bolt is slightly offset towards one edge than the other. This is going to come in play when we get our rails put up. So just to kind of give you an idea of what they're looking for with the offset, this is what they're talking about. So to get these zipped in, the smaller one's going to be a 3/4 inch socket, so I'll buzz those through first. And then for the larger ones, we're going to use a 15/16 socket. So we'll buzz all these down as well. And then once you buzz them down, you can zing all these back out as we're going to need them for the installation. Something else that I'll point out while we're here, as I was buzzing these down, I noticed that some of them are going to be longer than the others on the larger diameter bolts. So you should have 4 of the taller ones, and then we have 6 of these shorter ones. So just make sure you keep those separate so we're putting the right hardware in the right spot. We'll grab one of our rails and just peel back the liner. and you'll see this bed corrugation, or where the bed actually bolts up to the frame. We're going to be running our bar through here, so it's pretty well centered up on the tire. So we'll just slide this through, and you'll see you can't make it vertical here just due to the this edge on the bed and the frame. So as you slide this through, just try to make it over to the other side of the frame, and that will rest there. Now we're going to slide our other one in place. So I just scooted ours forward, and it's going to go in the same slot in front of that body mount, or the bed mount I should say. We'll get this slid in place. These do need to go vertical to where obviously our threads are facing horizontal, but it's pretty tight here. So even just kind of rotating this around, I got it to about here. And what you can do is open up a crescent wrench and get it about the same width as these rails. And you might be able to rotate this to where those that offset is faced towards the frame. So just make sure that those holes are closer to the ground here. And I cannot rotate this. It's pretty tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to be loosening up the bed bolts, and that's going to just kind of allow for a little bit more space. To loosen up the bed, it's just going to be a total of 6 bolts that we're going to be loosening up with an 18mm socket. Highly recommend a 1/2-inch impact on these. Some of them aren't too bad to get loose, but they can get a little bit tricky. So what we're going to be doing is just kind of go on the outside of the frame, and you may need, on mine I use an extension and a swivel. There's no straight clean shots on some of these, but just try your best here. And then I'm not going to completely remove them. I'm just going to loosen it enough. That way we don't completely you know, have the bed shift on us or anything. And then as we move forward, you're going to find that the other two, you just follow along on the frame rail. We'll find one right at the front of the leaf springs. Something else I'll point out, you might have noticed by now, but GM puts kind of an undercoating on the frame. It's oil-based, and it does create a nice mess. So make sure you have clothes on that you don't really care about, because it will stain them. And if you need to, you might want to use gloves, because this stuff comes off fairly easily and makes a mess. So we'll get our last bolt. And as long as you get the other side done, that should allow enough lift for us to be able to use that crescent wrench to pop these in place. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Now with our crescent wrench, we'll come back, and that should give us just enough wiggle room. Should raise that up. There we go. And I'll go ahead and do the same on our other one. Just again, make sure that that offset has those holes closer to the frame. We're going to get ready to put our center section up between the rails and loosely bolted up. But something that we're going to want to do is open up where the center section was located, and you're going to find this little trim shield. And this is really nice. CURT gives you this because it's really going to make it a nice template to drill exactly in the center, so we know exactly where to drill out for our holes. So with that in place, just make sure you have that there. We'll go ahead, we're going to grab some of our smaller hardware that we use to pre-drill through those rails to get this bolted up. So as we raise this up, make sure that the hole is offset towards the rear of the truck, so this should face towards the tailgate. And our hardware that we have are going to be the smaller bolts. We're also going to be putting conical tooth washers in place. You'll see that the teeth are going to bite into the center section. So as we raise this up, these are going to go into that threaded portion of each rail through the inside and bolt into those center sections, or into those rails. We don't need to fully tighten it down, and I just have 4 of them here. That way I can get these started, and then we can get the rest of the hardware up. So I'll go ahead, I'll get this raised up into place. And it is a tight fit here, so as I mentioned previous, if we need to lower that exhaust, we can do that, but I think I can get this in place without having to do that. Just be careful too, because you do have some harnesses here that obviously we don't want to damage in the process, so just take your time here. And with that slid in place, I'll grab my bolts and I'm going to get it aligned to our rail here first. So I'll just pass this hardware through, get this aligned, and you're going to have to lift up that center section to get this started. And what might help here, if you can slide a screwdriver through to kind of support this while getting your hardware in, you can go ahead and do that as well. Once you get one side held up to the rail with the hardware, we'll go ahead and get the other side in place. And you probably noticed that raising up that center section is definitely going to be key to kind of getting these to align. So I'll just kind of put pressure up and then get these started. We really just need a gap that's along here, and using the brackets is really going to get us exactly where we need to be. So with that, we'll grab our brackets, and you'll see that they are going to be side specific. And what I'm going to be looking for, you'll see this curve. This should face towards the front. This large hole should align pretty close to where the factory hole is going to be in the frame. So as I align this up, you'll see that this should slide between the rails. And as I hold that up, I can see that this hole is aligned. So that's kind of what we're looking for. If this hole is not aligned, you will need to move those rails in center section. And if it's really tight, what you can do is just put a pry bar between the bed corrugation and the frame rail. You can see just kind of right here. And just pry that up, and that's going to loosen up the bed. We still have those bed bolts loose, and that'll give you enough to be able to slide that exactly where you need to be to align those holes. And so make sure you hold up the bracket on both sides and make sure that those access holes are going to be easily lined up with our brackets. Grab your U-bolt and the two flange nuts that thread on here, and we're going to slide this over the frame rail. It'll go in between our rails, and it'll sit closer to the rear spot, but this will also help align that bracket. So just slide that in here. Now on the driver's side, it got a little trickier. I got this one in place already, and you'll see that there's hard lines next to the fuel tank. This bracket I was able to remove with two 13 millimeter bolts, and this is just going to open this out a little bit, and that's going to allow me to, later on, I'm going to put some spacers in here, and that's going to keep those hard lines from rubbing against that U-bolt. And with that U-bolt in place, I'm just going to kind of keep this loose enough to where I can slide it on our bracket, because as I put this in place, we're going to use the two holes in our bracket to get the U-bolt aligned. And get those passed through. And then take those flange nuts that we had and just get this started to hold it in place for us. And once these are started, this is a good time, double check that alignment. You can see here, it's drooped down a little bit, but this will still align if I just raise that up, so we're looking pretty good here. You're going to want to grab your fish wire and a carriage bolt as well as the spacer block, and we're going to thread the fish wire onto our carriage bolt as well as the spacer block, and this is going to allow us to pass this hardware through the frame and create the mounting point on our bracket. So take this pointed end, pass this through, and make sure it goes through our bracket. I'm going to reach over and find our access hole and just going to raise that up, feel for the end, and then I'll pull that through. And from here, you can just take your spacer block and drop this in the frame, same with the carriage bolt. And then on the other side, we'll just kind of jostle this around until we can pull the stud through. I'm going to use the bracket to kind of push down on the studs and then unthread the fish wire, because in this kit I only found that they gave me one pull wire, so we are going to need to use this on the other side when we repeat the same steps. So having that bracket kind of rest on the threads is going to make sure that it doesn't push back on the frame rail. And that's really going to be the biggest concern. You don't want that to fall back in. So grab that CURT or the serrated flange nut and get this started. And then at this point, we'll just repeat on the other side, do the exact same process. We're going to grab the bracket that looks like this, and it's going to go with this top portion facing towards the bed. We're then going to be using the 1.5-inch bolts. So we'll have 2 of them per bracket, and then we're going to be using the smaller washers that are included in the kit. So with those, we'll just raise it up in place right here, and then we'll get this threaded in. The U-bolt flange nut, I'm just going to tighten this in a little bit just to kind of give us a little bit more space, because we're going to pass our longer bolts with the large washers through the bracket into each of the rails, and I do recommend running that washer down. It'll make it a little bit easier here, and you may still need to kind of work around this bolt that we have here from our U-bolt. It's kind of tricky, but we should be able to get this to start here. And the head of the bolt was pretty tight against it, so just take your time here. And it might help, we'll just do the other side, that'll help align it, and we'll get one out of the way here, but pretty easy. It's just going to thread into our rail. And then I'll get this one started now. And I think what I'm going to do to give myself a little space is just back out that nut in the opposite way and push that back. I think that's going to be a lot easier. There we go. Now we have the clearance to at least get this started by hand. And then once we thread it past that bolt, we'll be able to get a wrench on there. And this may be a little bit tight, you know, just because of the weight of everything, but I'm going to take my 15/16 thin-walled socket and just start snugging this down. It doesn't have to be super tight. We just want to make sure we have some threads really started on here. So at this point, we have everything at least in place as far as hardware goes. Now, if you found that you had 4 extra bolts included in your kit, that's going to be for your long bed models, and there's a separate bracket that goes on. So if you have a long bed, it's going to be very similar. Just refer to the instruction manual for those portions. And at this point, we need to make sure everything's aligned properly. So really the best way to do this is the center hole is pretty spot on, so just make sure that that aligns with our gooseneck opening, and then also feeling the bed corrugation. We should find that you know, our brackets are pretty well aligned or close to it, but there is going to be a little bit of wiggle room here and there, but we want to make sure that it's in, you know, the center spot where we want it before we start tightening down our hardware. So if you need to, you can pry up the bed a little bit to shift this as necessary, but with all of our brackets roughly in place, it should be pretty close. Now when it comes to tightening and torquing down, there is going to be a specific process that's going to make sure that it draws up nice and well. The first things that we're going to be doing are brackets that are located that we bolted up here. We're going to get these and also the outside bolts that are on our bracket. So these are going to be 15/16. We'll go ahead, we're going to snug them down first, and then we'll come back with our torque wrench. Make sure we snug up our U-bolts as well, and we're just going to kind of go back and forth to make sure that they're evenly done. Get all of our center section bolts. This will be a 3/4 inch socket, so we'll just snug these down. And then our final step is going to be to tighten down these side bolts that go into our front and rear rails. So go ahead, get that all snug down. Now, following that same sequence that we tightened down our hardware, we're going to come back with our torque wrench, and using those same sockets we used to snug these down, we'll get these torqued down. Now, the larger hardware has a much larger torque spec than the smaller one, so make sure you're adjusting accordingly, obviously, for each size bolt. And the torque wrench, this is going to be key, obviously, to make sure that long-term you're able to haul stuff down the road and not worry about it becoming loose, but also it's not going to be too tight, putting any stress on the hardware. As far as torque wrench, you can get these here at eTrailer. Generally, you can rent one at an auto parts store for free, but you're going to want a 1/2-inch torque wrench to accomplish these torque settings. Some of these spots are going to get a little bit tight, so just take your time and make sure that they're all torqued down properly. Now, I am going to be honest with you. When it comes to torquing down the hardware on any underbed gooseneck kit, this is really the part that just seems to take forever, and I would venture to say the hardest part. Reason being, you got some pretty high torque specs, and you have some bolts that are in spots that are really tricky to get to. I try my best not to use a swivel on a torque wrench. It does kind of skew those numbers a little bit, but for some of these, you're just going to have to do the best you can. So even using extensions pretty far out here with a 1/2-inch torque wrench, that's how I'm going to accomplish some of this. But again, just know that when you're struggling trying to get these torqued down, I was doing the same thing. So take your time. You really only have to torque these down, for the install, and then the rest of the time you shouldn't have to worry. They do mention that you should re-torque them after some use, but this is the hard part of the install, so just take your time. Now, with everything torqued down, we do need to go back and make sure you tighten down your bed bolts. So with that 18, go through and tighten those down. We also have this bracket that previously I removed to make sure that it's not rubbing against the lines. And what I'd recommend doing here is just put a piece of wood or something along here, and you can slightly bend these lines to where they're going to be out of the way, not making contact with our U-bolt, and then you can bolt this back in. If you are having issues with it still rubbing, once you tighten it down, you might throw a few spacers or washers in there to space this out as we tighten it down. Now it's time to put some holes in our bed, and the first one we're going to do, when we put that centering device or that bracket inside the hole, that's going to give us our pilot hole to drill up through the bed, and then we can do the rest of it from up top. The same thing goes with the safety chain loop. So first, starting off, I have a 3/16 drill bit, and I'm going to slide this up, and we're going to make sure that it's aligned in that cap that we put in here. And then we're going to want to drill all the way through, and that's going to create the pilot hole up top, so that way we can enlarge it with our hole saw. So I'll just make sure I'm properly aligned, and then I'll start drilling. Now for the safety chain holes, that's going to be a little bit trickier because of the exhaust. This might be a good time to lower that down to give us a little bit of room to work, but also just getting a bit in there is tricky. A right angle drill is definitely going to be the key here, and probably a shorter bit. So I'll get the exhaust popped down, and then we're just going to run pilot holes through both holes on each side, and then we can finish it from up top. That seems to be a lot easier than trying to get it all drilled out underneath here. So lowering down the exhaust, I just took the isolator here. There's also 2 of them up by the canister up there. I did put a cradle with a ratchet strap just to kind of make sure that it's not going to be fully hanging down and cause any damage. But this does drop it down just enough for us to get these drilled out. So I did use a center punch to kind of get a nice spot started, and then I'm just going to drill all the way through. Now this truck has a spray and bed liner, so sometimes it's kind of hard to see where we drilled through, but you can see our safety chain loops are drilled through, and then we have our center mark for our opening on the gooseneck. So at this point we're going to be enlarging this using a 4-inch hole saw. So this is going to catch pretty easily, so just make sure that you have this braced with, use your legs or your ankles or something along those lines, because it will want to work around a little bit. Just take your time here and just make sure you get a nice clean shot on it. But you don't want this to start walking around, otherwise it can be a little bit troublesome. Our template worked out really well because as I drilled, it went in perfectly to our hole saw, so you can get that removed. But we're going to drill out the safety chain loops before we start doing any other things, because we're going to come back and take down some of these burrs and then touch it up with paint. There's also going to be some trim applications that we're going to put on, but we'll just make it a one-step process of cleaning and having that paint out. So what I recommend doing is grab the U-bolts from your safety chain loops to have them ready. And as we enlarge these out, we're looking to do a 5/8. You can go a little bit bigger. Sometimes it's actually it actually works out a little bit with the spray and bed liner. Sometimes it can catch. And the main thing is we'll enlarge these out and then take those safety chain loops and just kind of drop them in. They should go in nice and easy. So that way when they are spring loaded, you're not having to fight against them. And you can use a step bit here as well, and a lot of times that's going to be a good spot. Obviously you don't want to go too large to where it's going to be larger than the center section holes that we have, but yeah, just take your time here. And what you're looking for is kind of something along these lines. You can see it's pretty easy to move up and down, but it gets tighter. So I'm going to just take a burr bit and kind of shave down those the spray and bed liner, I think, is what's binding it to where it's not going in flat. But this passes up and down nice and smooth. So once I kind of take off that spray and bed liner there, it should drop in nice and flat. So I'll go ahead, I'll get my other side drilled out, and then I'm going to take a file to this. Now you might want to file down these burrs here on the center section, because the trim ring does slip on the edge, and having those burrs is going to make it a little bit more difficult. So go ahead with a small file and get those knocked down. Should just drop in like that. I'm really happy with that. Once it's spring loaded, it's going to draw it back, but I can still pinch around here and it moves nice and easy. We're going to coat all this raw metal. We want to make sure that doesn't turn to rust and corrosion long term. So you can use spray paint. I found that it's a little bit cleaner if you use just a paint marker and run it along that edge of the raw metal. That's going to coat that up. Now the rubber edge that they give us to put around the cut that we made, it's going to be really, really tight. The bed is pretty well cinched against our center section, so you can pry on that a little bit. I do worry that it's just not going to, seat on there very well long term. But I think on these raised edges, it makes sense. It's going to protect that and keep, as we pull the ball out or anything, from scratching that up and causing rust long term. So I'm going to just cut a section here on the top corrugation, and I think that's going to be decent protection without having to bend up our bed to get it to fit. Grab our trim ring, and this is going to align with the holes that are on our center section, and then there's going to be hardware included, so we'll get these threaded in, and then we can tighten these down. Drop these in place, and that way they're ready to go when we head underneath the truck. Now to get the springs on our safety chain loops, pretty easy. We'll grab our flat washer and slide that up first, then take your spring, and then another flat washer and push that up, enough to where you can get the nylon lock nut in place. And we'll get the other side in place as well. You'll come back with a 15/16 socket, and we're just going to tighten it to where the bottom of the U-bolt is flush with the nylon lock nut, so it doesn't take a whole lot here. And then just slide this up and down. You can hop up in the bed, make sure that it's nice and even, but it should spring load down nice and flat. Now we're going to put our handle in place, and this can actually be on the passenger or driver's side. I would imagine driver's side more than likely is where you're going to go. Take our handle and we're going to pass it through, and if you look straight through, you can see the opening that goes into the center section. So we'll just get this passed all the way through there. So with our handle slid through, we're going to take this locking pin, and we're going to want this top portion with the hole. That's where we're going to put our handle. So we'll just take this and we're going to slide it in. Our handle, there's a bracket that you might have noticed when we did the center section where it goes through. There's a loop here. So make sure that's passed through. And our spring is going to live between this bracket and this block, the locking pins here. So we need to get our spring in place. So what we're going to do is take a flat washer, and we'll just slide that over the handle. We'll then take our spring and put that on the handle as well. And then you can push the handle forward, kind of compress that spring a little bit before putting the other flat washer. Sorry, it's kind of probably hard to see here, but that handle is going to go into our locking pin, and that's where that hole is. We have small hardware that we're going to get in place, and that's just going to attach it all together. So that spring's just keeping my washer in place. I can then slide my handle in. You'll feel it bottom out on this portion. I may have to change my angle, but the hardware that we're going to be using is going to be this bolt and a small, tiny nylon lock nut here. So we're going to pass that through and get it tightened down. And to pin this all together, it's going to be a 9/32 and a 5/16. So just pass that through and get it bolted down. Now we need to test to make sure that the handle is working properly, not catching on anything. So the best way to do that, you just simply pull this out, twist it towards the front, and that'll hold it in place. And then you can release it, push it towards the back, and it should lock back in. If you do need to make a notch here for clearance, you can go ahead and do that. And you may also need to trim your fender liner. So that's something that you're going to want to take care of. But at this point, you can load the ball up. Also make sure that that's engaging. We just need to make sure that we got all our heat shields put back up, our fender liners put back in place, spare tire, and really anything else that we have loose to get tidied up. Other than that, we just installed the Underbed Gooseneck kit. I will say with this heat shield, trying to put this back, it's not really wanting to fit too well up here. Well, that's due to our brackets and everything being there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bend this one down, and that's going to allow us to kind of get all the other ones mounted up. If you want to, you can go ahead and trim that, but that should help us along here. And that was a look and installation of the CURT EZr Underbed Gooseneck kit with double lock, rated at 30,000 pounds on a 2024 GMC Sierra 2500.